Welcome to The People's View, a program dedicated to discussing local, state, and national issues and their effect on the American people. The People's View provides a platform for state representatives and national figures to present their viewpoint. Whether it's social, economic, or financial topics, you'll hear it on The People's View.
Welcome to The People's View. This is Representative Carl Seidel and our co-host, my co-host, Representative Peter Silver, was not able to make it tonight, but we have a wonderful guest here, Mark Cookson, our Alderman-at-Large for the City of Nashua. Mark was elected Alderman-at-Large in 2009 after serving several terms as Alderman for Ward 1. Mark now is chosen by Mayor Lozo to be on the board of directors for the Pennachuck Waterworks, and he's going to talk tonight about the waterworks in Pennachuck and what we're going to be doing, as well as a couple other topics. Mark, go ahead.
Carl, thank you so much. I appreciate the introduction. I actually was not selected to be on the board of directors of Pennachuck, but I was part of the committee, the selection process.
Okay.
To interview and make sure that those people that we did select to be on the board of directors were highly qualified.
Good.
So,
well, I guess from what we read in the paper, it's a pretty good board.
That's right. We've got I believe it is 9 candidates for the board of directors, and right now they're sort of a ghost board. They're, because the transaction hasn't taken place between the city and Pennachuck, buying the shares of Pennachuck, the publicly traded company. We've just announced them. We put them together. I'm sure they're meeting in some capacity right now so that on day one, they're actually able to start their work as the new board of directors of Pennachuck. So yeah, very exciting things going on with that. The mayor recently announced that we have released $150.6 million of bonds, or to gain through JP Morgan, to see if there were any interested parties in purchasing those bonds. And I believe that the mayor said within the first 5 hours that we had $330 million worth of soft sell.
Wow.
So yeah, we were actually
and at a good rate too, I understand.
At a great rate, 4.09%.
Right.
So that drop, the percentage that was going to decide whether we move forward or terminate the transaction was set at 6.5%.
Wow. And
we were able to acquire the bonds or sell the bonds at 4.09%. And again, Mayor Lozo, her calculations indicate that there will be an $82 million cost avoidance over the 30 years of the bonds.
That's pretty good.
Exactly. So
that'll help our ratepayers.
It should.
Okay.
It should help our ratepayers.
Okay.
And that's one of the things that we're looking out for are the ratepayers, and that's why the city's gone through this effort over, what is it? It's got to be 8 years now. I know that it was during Bernie Streeter's time as mayor, and he was going through an eminent domain process.
Right.
When Mayor Lozo became mayor 4 years ago, she sort of transitioned that to be not an eminent domain, but more of a negotiated
business
settlement.
type transaction.
Exactly.
And do we get any debt that occurred from Pennachuck that go along
we
with this?
acquire all their debt.
All right.
I want to say it's close to $60 million worth of acquired debt from Pennachuck. But the transaction is to take place, I believe, February 3rd. It's a few days before their Pennachuck shareholder meeting. And so we hope to have this transaction completed by the end of this month or right at the beginning of February.
How does that affect the transmission and management of the people that are working there?
We've always, I can't say we've always, since Mayor Lozo's strategy to make this a negotiated settlement, a business transaction, we've used the term plug and play. And what that means for the city of Nashua is that the people who work at Pinachuk, with the exception of senior management, are still going to be the people that you interact with day in and day out. If you have an issue with your water supply, it's the same customer service number. Nothing changes. The only thing that gets removed is that top layer of senior management, which is Dwayne Montopoli and a few of his senior executives.
I see. So nobody will really be affected by it. Everything will operate the same way.
That's what we hope.
And how will they be determining the rate? Does that still go through the public utilities?
Yes, it does. Absolutely. And that's one of the things that we've always. Again, I hate to use the definite terms always, but one of the things that we said we would do is that we would continue to go before the PUC in order to establish rates. And hopefully, once this transaction is over, you will see a decrease. Hopefully, you won't see an increase. We definitely won't see an increase in rates nearly as the slope that Pinachuk would have provided those rate increases. You may still see a rate increase, but it won't nearly be at the same rate.
Well, I know they had a lot of rate increases over the last 2 years
That's
because
right.
of the capital improvements
Exactly.
that they've done. But you're adding into it the payment off of the bonds. So I was wondering how that figured out, that balance, or is there any more big capital improvements that is needed?
There will always be capital improvements. The pipes in the city are probably 100 years old, and we know that there are going to be capital improvement costs that we need to have as part of this. We've built that into the model.
Oh, okay.
And still, while at the beginning of this 30 years, it may be very tight as far as the amount of revenue required to run the company, as you expand that over the 30 years, you should see a greater variance between what Pinachuk's rates would have been and what the city of Nashua's rates would have been, and we will still be able to do the capital improvements and be able to provide the water at a quality that's expected.
So the ratepayers are going to see maybe a little bit more stable rate as you go along.
That's the expectation.
An increase, but at a lower rate.
That's the expectation.
Good, good. Well, Mark, are you going to have them on your radio show?
Well, that's a great question. So I do have a radio show. Yeah. The radio show is called the Nashua Hour. It's every Thursday at noontime. And during that show, it's very similar to what you do here on the People's View, is you have conversations with whether on the People's View you might pull in some state issues. I talk about Nashua. And so we talk about Nashua for about an hour from 12 to 1 on WSMN 1590 AM. That's also podcasted and available online, so you can listen to it right from your computer. And we talk to different folks. I've had Robin Ann Peters on talking about the history of the mill yard. That's another topic that we'll probably touch on this afternoon. With regard to the Broad Street Parkway. I had Speaker O'Brien on talking about James O'Keefe and his recent undercover expose about fraudulent voting and where he came to a couple of polls in Nashua.
Yes, Nashua and Manchester.
That's right.
Both. He went there and pretended to be a dead person.
Yes, he did. Well, he had some undercover agents that were doing that. So yes.
And that was very interesting because up in Concord, we hear why we don't need a voter ID, and yet it was very easy for, 9 people that went in and got a ballot?
It was about a 10-minute video of person after person being able to go up to a ward clerk and saying, I'm such and such, or is such and such a person on the roll, and they would respond in the affirmative, and they would then hand the corresponding ballot to the individual and then the individual would come back and say, do you need to check my ID? My ID's in the car, let me go get it. Yeah. So they did not actually vote in the primary, but they wanted to prove how easy it might be to obtain a ballot.
Right. And I think people have complained about it in the past because they're all anecdotal stories, but nobody ever followed through on it. And now we have some visual evidence that this can happen.
You do
very
have visual
easily.
evidence. Unfortunately, I think James O'Keefe is in just a little bit of hot water. I know that City Clerk Paul Bergeron has asked that he be prosecuted to the highest extent that he can be, whether it be wiretapping. You're not supposed to be able, or not videotaping anybody without their knowledge. If these individuals came from across state lines, there's a concern about that as well.
Oh,
so
I see. Well, maybe you or my co-host Pete Silver, who also has a radio show on Thursdays at 10 on the same station. But no, I think that's one of the reasons that we have this show now, is now we have this video that can be shown and can be shown around the state. We think some of the topics we'll have being discussed over the next few months are going to be very interesting. And
South Carolina is also interested in this as well, and actually the Department of Justice has just ruled that that there is no, you can't have the voter ID, the photo ID in South Carolina, and we're leading up to their primary. So, and they were hoping that it would be in place prior to their primary.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we'll see what we can do. You want to go over and talk about the Broad Street Parkway for next? Okay.
Absolutely. What would you like to know?
Well, I'd like to know how that's moving along. I mean, right now I'm kind of concerned. It's only a 2-lane road in there.
It is.
And that what kind of traffic problems are going to be arranged, and how the bridge, the demolition of certain buildings and stuff like that. What do you think about that?
You know, so I'm not sure how many of your viewers actually know where the Broad Street Parkway is. So let me just talk about that in the very simplest terms that I can. So on Broad Street, right before you get to the railroad tracks as you're traveling east toward Hudson, and right before you get to the Dairy Queen, there is an outdoor power supply building that is still there. That is planned for demolition, and that is going to be the entrance of the Broad Street Parkway. You meander through some landlocked areas back to like Fimbledore, the Mohawk Tannery. Those areas are landlocked, but those are you're going to be able to access those now through the path of the Broad Street Parkway. It then goes along the right-of-way, or next to the right-of-way of the rail line. And then as you approach Franklin Street, that is where the bridge is supposed to take you over the Nashua River and land at the Mill Yard Technology building. And then once you're in the Mill Yard, it then hooks up with the Pine Street extension. One of the building, actually after I finish telling you the path of it, I'll explain to you which buildings are going to be impacted and affected by it. So it hooks up with the Pine Street extension and continues straight over Central and Ledge Street, right next to where the Labine building just burned down. There's a new park that's going in there. And you will continue on Pine Street, where its terminus is, at West Hollis and Kinsley Street. And that's going to be a one-way to
Okay, they're not going to allow parking on there, are they?
They're talking about widening the road, so there may be
I
parking.
see. Okay.
But what's interesting about it is at the terminus, it's a one-way pair. So Pine Street's going to be one-way going south. Palm Street's going to be one-way north, which is going to be how you get back onto the Broad Street Parkway. A 1.8-mile roadway. It's a 2-lane road with a center turn lane in some points to get off of the parkway. So that's your parkway. Whether it's not a highway, it's a roadway. It's a 2-lane road. Now, the buildings that are going to be impacted, and that's probably where a lot of concern is right now. I mentioned that I spoke to Robin Ann Peters on the show, and she's concerned from an historical perspective. The boiler house is going to be demolished.
That's where the chimney is?
Correct.
Yeah.
That's where as you're driving, and at any point in the city, you can see the chimney extend above the line, and it says Mill Yard on it. That's your chimney, your smokestack. Right next to it is the boiler house. That's going to be demolished. The boiler house I want to say it was built in the 1870s, 1880s. All supplied all the power to the machine that is known as Nashua Manufacturing Corp.
Oh.
The
So that's what developed the commercial part of Nashua at that time?
It was actually functioning as the commercial part of Nashua prior to that, but what happened in about the 1880s was that Nashua experienced a drought.
Oh.
And everything was run by the
Water
power of the river.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And when that failed, they had to develop another power source, and that's where the boiler house came into existence. Miles and miles of tunnels and piping to supply the steam, the power, to run all the mills, the turbines, everything that
On
you
both
needed.
sides of the river.
Yes, and so where Clock Tower Apartments is, that was where all the cotton was actually manufactured into the blankets and such. And then you've got the Picker Building right next to that. The Picker Building was where they picked the cotton. It went into the mills. It went across the parking lot, which used to be the canal, and they covered that up to have a parking lot.
Really?
Yeah.
Where did the canal go through there? Right through the the whole
right,
heart of
right
it, past to the bridge on Main Street?
Exactly. Yes.
Oh.
So it was very interesting. So we've said the boiler house is going to be demolished. Another building, Bagshaw Building, or the waste house, is going to actually be moved from its current location to another area within the mill yard. And then the last building is the train freight depot, which in meetings at City Hall has been referred to as Storehouse Number 2. Storehouse Number 2 is a building that has a Greek Revival architecture on the gable end of it, dating back to, some people estimate it circa 1848, 1851, somewhere in that time frame. So we're talking Civil War era. And in what is being proposed, the path of the Parkway is going to require that end piece be removed so the Parkway can go through there. Yes. So they want to take about 200 feet off of the end and then recreate that Greek architecture, Greek Revival architecture on the next section. So that's
Are they going to turn that building into any kind of museum or historical thing?
Right now, the Storehouse Number 2, the train freight depot, is owned by Gate City Fence. And Gate City Fence uses it as, I believe, storage for their supply. But I don't believe that there are any plans at this point to develop anything into a museum. But it's a great point, because one of the things that I was going to mention about the boiler house was that all the steel, all the boilers that were built in there, they were built out of necessity. They were built first edition boilers, and they were built by Nashuans trying to develop this new technology. It's the first of its kind technology. Exactly.
And it lasted quite a long time.
And it lasted. And what you see now are boilers that are, very, very, I want to say a couple of, like 10, 20 feet tall.
Yeah, a couple stories tall.
Exactly. And there's a lot of history that goes into it. In fact, MIT's first graduating class came up to Nashua at that time, the 1880s, when the boiler house was, just beginning, to understand and learn the technology so that they could take it back to MIT and teach it. So there's a lot of history.
Somebody just did it by the seat of their pants, I guess you might say. Very good. And so what's the schedule for the completion?
Well, we hope to have groundbreaking on the Broad Street Parkway. They're already starting to do some work on Pine and Palm Street as far as sewers and things like that. They want to begin the Broad Street Parkway sometime in 2012. and then they hope for completion in 2014 to actually be drivable.
Drivable. And will there be a walking area there to cross the
Great
bridge?
question. You know, at one point in time, it had to be scaled back.
Right.
I believe that I recall that one of our senators, and I believe it was Senator Shaheen, was able to identify some funding, federal funding,
to get
that
that?
would allow for some pedestrian traffic, walk paths or
I
sidewalks.
think there'd be a lot of people that might want to use that, and you could develop that whole area on both sides. I'd like to see that like a river walk. I don't know if you've ever been down in San Antonio. That's beautiful there.
Some people, you know, a gentleman by the name of Fred came to one of our last board meetings and was talking about making sure that it was accessible to cyclists. And so we, you know, we want to be a pedestrian-friendly community. So certainly I don't think we want to avoid having bike lanes and walkways and sidewalks so that we can promote that.
I know you have a bike path on the one side of the road that could be extended and come over to this side of the river, the north side of the river.
Possibly.
Very interesting. We look forward to seeing the progress on that. As an alderman, we just had your 106th inauguration last.
Not my 106th inauguration,
Yeah.
but the city had its 106th inauguration. Where a new board of aldermen, the 106th board of aldermen, were inaugurated. It was a great ceremony.
So, how many new people on there? What assignments do you have?
Great question. I believe that, and I'll run through it quickly. I believe that we have Jim Donchis, former mayor of the city. He is a new Board of Aldermen member, Alderman-at-Large. We also have Dan Moriarty, from Ward 9. And who else? June Karen from Ward 7 and Rick Dowd from Ward 2. They had about 2 months of experience on the board because they filled seats at the end of the last term. But this is their first full term. So I think we have 4 new members on the Board of Aldermen.
And what are you going to be doing? What are they assigned to you?
Well, I'm continuing on with my Board of Budget Committee, Budget Committee review. And I will also be chairing the Infrastructure Committee. And then I have several liaison positions. I'm on the Board of Public Works. I'm a liaison to the Nashua Arts Commission, and an alternate to a few more.
That keeps you busy.
It does keep me busy.
And you have a full-time job, too.
I have a full-time job and a radio show.
How about that? Well, you have your radio show, Pete Silva has, and we have the People's View here, and we're sponsored by the Nashua Republican City Committee, as you know. And our next meeting is on February 9th, 7 p.m. at the Crown Plaza. Anybody can come to see what's happening at the on the local politics, because we have, as you know, 22 of the city's representatives are Republican, and we're all working fairly hard up there. We had over 200 bills retained. They were the more complicated bills, and we're working through those right now. And then we have somewhere between 700 and 800 new bills that we have to consider before the end of our
And I think
session.
one of those bills is going to be about voter ID.
That's right. Maybe we'll have some reason to have people vote on the right way on that one.
Yeah.
But thank you again for this evening. And
Carl, I appreciate your time.
you on board, and we're going to have you back again when we find out as the Broad Street Parkway begins.
Absolutely. I'd be glad to come back and share any information that I have. If people have questions in the meantime, they can visit my website, aldermancookson.com. I've got links to the Broad Street Parkway. I've got links to Pinnachuck. I've got links to the radio show and some recent podcasts that are broadcast.
Right.
You can get to all that information at aldermancookson.com.
Very good.
Follow me on Facebook and Twitter.
Well, how about that? And I might as well get the plug in for the NashuaGOP.org website, and you'll find out a lot of different things on that website and tie into these sessions that you can pull up from a historical record. we're trying to get this more broadcast statewide. I think we'll get that. Okay. Thank you again for your coming on board.
Thanks, Carl. Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.